the Pfizer clinical trial, there was one for 16 and older. That's what we just looked at. Separately, and that's what it was authorized for in December 2020 for 16 and older. Separately, to get an authorization and licensure for 12 to 15-year-olds, there was a separate clinical trial. Okay. In this clinical trial, they vaccinated a grand total of 1,131 kids. Maddy Garay, our client, is one of those children. Okay. You could see a picture of her on October 20th doing a handstand. January 16th, this is her doing a TikTok video. And this is January 20th. She goes in for her second Pfizer dose, not as just a person in the public, as a clinical trial participant. Do you know how I know her parents were not against vaccines? She participated in a clinical trial. Just get the vaccine, right? They wanted to do their part. They wanted to step up and help. This is Maddy. You can see in the video on the left. She had, within 24 hours, she was in an emergency room, a cascade of emergency room visits that eventually resulted in her being in a wheelchair and have a feeding tube. She basically has a form of, neurological disorder, which is common type of injury, at least when there's a vaccine injury. All right. So a lot of vaccine injuries that we deal with are immune or immune-mediated neurological issues, like Guillain-Barré syndrome, transverse myelitis. You can go down the list. It's basically where your immune system attacks your nerves. In the case of, for example, GBS, starts in your periphery, works your way up. You could recover. You can get paralyzed. We have all types of GBS cases at our firm that we bring. So now the fact that Maddy was injured by a vaccine is okay. Drugs injure people. It happens. The real concern from a regulatory perspective is how the FDA dealt with it. That is the real travesty. Not in any way to minimize the pain and harm to Maddy. So this, now that we got all of the documents that Pfizer submitted to the FDA to license its COVID vaccine, this is what the Pfizer reported Maddy's injury to the FDA as. They reported it as functional abdominal pain. They did not say she's in a wheelchair. They did not say she couldn't walk. They did not say she has a feeding tube. They basically said it's in her head and she's got a tummy ache. And the reason that it's a Siri LLP link, not a FDA link, by the way, is because we had to file a lawsuit in Southern District of Ohio to get these documents from the FDA. What did Pfizer tell the public about Maddy? Well, here's its published report in May 27, 2021. It says there were no vaccine-related serious adverse events in its trial. That's what it told the public. I believe that's, again, the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, we at our firm, I mentioned earlier, we do vaccine injury cases. We have 3 medical professionals on staff. We have lawyers and paralegals, and we litigate vaccine injuries all day. We don't do them against pharma companies. You can't because of the 86 Act. We do them in a little federal program called the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and I'll tell you about that later. But we review medical records all day long to assess causality and whether we can prove causality in court. If I could bring a case for Maddy in court, I could easily prove that, no question, the Pfizer's vaccine is the causal reason. There's no differential diagnosis. There's no other reason. And there's a biological reason, plausible reason for how it was caused, and all the records showed that the etiology was from the vaccine. In any event, we sent numerous detailed letters with access to all of Maddy's medical records to the FDA, saying, "Hey, FDA, this is what the Pfizer told the public, and here's what Pfizer told you, and we're telling you this is not true. This is not true. Maddy was seriously injured, and you know what? Even if Pfizer doesn't think it's from the vaccine, The reporting requirements required it provide that information. That's the whole idea of a clinical trial. You assess, you gather all the reactions. Now you want to then say it's not the vaccine, fine, but you got to report it. And we said, either way, even if you conclude the vaccine didn't cause it, which I don't know how you do that, Pfizer should be in huge trouble for not telling you about this. Not just not telling you, misrepresenting to you that this was functional abdominal pain. That first link, you can read all our letters, and they're detailed. They're medical. I had our medical professionals detailed all of it, and we finally got a response in February 26, 2022. So months later. And you can go and read that response yourself. The response from the FDA was, have Maddy follow VAERS report. I literally can't make that up. I encourage everyone to read it. That was their response. Here's what's incredible. An onslaught of folks kept contacting the FDA about Maddy. And in June of 2021, and this is from our lawsuit in the Southern District of Ohio, we sued the FDA because they wouldn't give us the documents. Thank God for FOIA, for Freedom of Information Act. And we finally got all the internal emails within the FDA regarding Maddy to Garay, including email communications where somebody who's very, very, very wealthy emails Janet Woodcock, who was then the acting director, commissioner of the FDA. And so that apparently finally prompts her to then email Dr. Peter Marks, the head of the vaccine division, who then emails a bunch of other folks and say, can you guys look into this? Our letters didn't do it. Maddy being on national news didn't do it, but apparently this did it. I don't know why. They email Pfizer and they say, Pfizer, what's up with this situation with Maddy? Pfizer emails back a detailed report for the first time explaining all the issues she had. Okay? For the first time. If I'm at the FDA, my response should be, what the heck? Why didn't you tell me this before? And what else are you hiding from me? But that's not the exchange. That link at the bottom, I encourage everybody to read. You want to see how the FDA works? You want to see how the sausage is made? You should read this internal email exchange about Maddy to Garay. When you read this assessment by Pfizer, you would think, oh my God, there it is. Pfizer's admitting it was the vaccine. Because that's the way it reads. And at the very end, it says the PI, the principal investigator, who's paid by Pfizer, did not feel the subject's symptomatology, that's how they spelled it, was consistent with a vaccine-related adverse event. And that was it. That's where the chain ends. They email that back up the chain, and they just accept that conclusion. There's nothing in the communications to see that Pfizer is going to be investigated. Pfizer is going to be in trouble for this. Are they going to do another audit of its documents? Are they going to look further into this? Are they going to contact Maddy's family? They're going to contact us? Nothing. I'm sorry, please.
What do you mean he did not feel?
He didn't feel. I didn't feel like having coffee this morning. I felt like having two. He didn't feel that her injuries were consistent with the vaccine. It isn't incredible, but it's incredible because remember, you're talking about a product that's new. The whole point of the clinical trials is to see what issues it could cause that are unknown. And he says, well, this doesn't fit with what basically I understand a vaccine to be able to cause. So it's not vaccine related.
So just to follow up on that. So as an investigator who's paid by the company that's making the vaccine, isn't it his job to assess and not feel?
That was his assessment.
Representative Potenza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just kind of wanted you to repeat this because I think it's so important for it to be said. This is was authorized under emergency youth authorization. It was done in a way that pushed things out before really having enough knowledge, I believe, and it's not doesn't fall under any sort of traditional quote unquote vaccine. So you're telling me they based it off of, let's say, for example, an MMR of adverse effects because it didn't follow some of those things, and that's what they based upon, in a sense.
Well, I think you might be giving Dr. Frank too much credit there. It's his assessment of what he feels is a vaccine-related adverse event.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The documents that came out that Pfizer was withholding for a period of time that was, I believe, almost 9 pages long of different side effects that you could have, was that released at this point?
So it wasn't Pfizer withholding, by the way, it was the FDA, because it was Pfizer has no obligation to produce documents to the public. The only reason the FDA had to produce those to the public was because of the Freedom of Information Act. And I don't think our lawsuit had yet received an order to produce the documents at this point. And you're testing. I'm not sure if that page of potential adverse events that Pfizer had listed was public yet.
Thank you.
I'd have to check.
Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to take just a second. I have up here a website article I wanted to quickly note in the record, statnews.com, August 9th, 2021, indicating as the FDA was searching for a new commissioner, there was a letter writing campaign undertaken by those who statistically had significant financial contributions from the pharmaceutical industries, indicating significant pharmaceutical industry support for Commissioner Woodcock to be named as head of the FDA. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, my assessment is actually that when you look at all the internal emails, the person really calling the shots in terms of authorizing and licensing these vaccines at the FDA was Dr. Peter Marks, not Dr. Woodcock. To be sure, she actually had to sign it at the end of the day, I believe. Though actually, I think it was Dr. Peter Marks who signed the authorizations, if my recollection serves me. But he was the one really, when you look at the internal documents, my assessment is he's the one who really made that decision. I mean, he's the one who decided really at the end of the day. I mean, there's VRBAC, which is the advisory committee, I mean, within the FDA that advises the FDA about whether or not to license or not license and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's Dr. Peter Marks who made the decision of whether or not there would be a VRBAC hearing or not. And then really what would happen. And when Gruber and Strauss, for example, his two subordinates would not, would not, as the internal email show, authorize and then a license on a timeline that he wanted. That really is what led to, I believe, their going out. The internal communications reflect them emailing and taking significant issue with Dr. Marks trying to move up the licensure timeline because, among other reasons, he believed that once it was licensed that there'd be more mandates. And so he wanted to try to accelerate the licensure process, and Gruber and Strauss pushed back, and they ended up on the outside of the on the other side of the FDA front doors. But going back to Maddy.
Excuse me one moment, Representative Potenza.
You might get to hear in your presentation. I just, and I think it's really important because it's kind of like no one's talking about the J&J, the one shot at all, which of course fell under emergency youth authorization.
Yep.
Our committee had someone here that was vaccine injured. Her daughter was from that. I know several other people here in the state that were injured from that shot. And we promoted that a lot here in New Hampshire. And I just was wondering, do you have any information on that specifically? Because it was like here, it got pulled, it got put back, and then now it doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I focus on the Pfizer, Moderna, and particularly Pfizer because that is what most Americans receive. Very small percentage of Americans receive the J&J shot. And then there's the Novavax shot, which even smaller percentage got. And AstraZeneca was never authorized or licensed here. So, yeah, I mean, J&J used a bit more of a traditional platform, but it had similar issues. I mean, look, again, from my perspective, I don't really view the what you call, you know, the mRNA vaccines as any really different than most of the other vaccines or like the J&J. I mean, to the extent that, you know, I mean, using DNA technology, like I said, recombinant DNA vaccines use DNA technology. I mean, they take basically snippets of DNA, they take yeast DNA, they take out a slice, they splice in the antigens that they want to create. And then I mean, it's kind of a DNA technology too, and we've been doing that since, you know, for 30 years. So, I mean, if we're going to differentiate vaccines based on the technology that they use to make them, then it's hard to actually label. There's a lot of silos for vaccines. And again, my assessment is not that they were rushed. The J&J vaccine had also, you know, had different types of issues, in particular TTS, right? And what made TTS so interesting is that it's not normal to have reduced platelet counts, right? But yet increased clotting. So normally someone comes in with clotting, you give them a blood thinner because you figure they're having too many platelets. Problem is that people presenting with blood clots are giving them blood thinners, not realizing their platelet count's already low, and then killing them in a hospital by mistake, unintentionally, using, you know, they thought they were doing the right thing. And because it's not a common event, it's not going to hide in a background rate. That's stuck out like a sore thumb, TTS. And that's why it made the news right away. It was identified, and adverse events that are common in the background rate are far harder to tease out, so to speak. But on J&J, at least, TTS was obviously recognized, which is why they pulled in, then it came back. Okay. So anyway, I think I'm about to wrap up the clinical trial section, almost. By the way, Maddy Garay, adding insult to injury, was censored all over the internet for just telling her story. All of her posts were, you know, censored. You were throttled. People were kicked off for doing it. And you might say, well, why? Why would the FDA do this? I can't answer completely, and I think I've given some snippets as to it. But here's Dr. Peter Marks. This is the man who really decided whether to authorize and license Covaxin. He's the one in that email chain I just told you about with Maddy. Way after what? After he'd already gone to the American people and told them, you should all get this shot, before it was even licensed. This is Dr. Marks in a YouTube video. This is him. He made this. The FDA made this. Doing just a minute. This is the person who's supposed to impartially, objectively, coldly look at this data, decide whether millions of Americans should get it, and he's out there promoting the vaccine. That creates an inherent conflict. He goes and he tells everybody to get it. Is he really then going to go, oops, sorry, I messed up? He should have been nowhere near promotion of this product. No place. The FDA doesn't go out and promote drugs. That's why they don't have as much of an issue to pull those products. They say, oh, yeah, Ozempic, yep, oopsie. Yeah, we messed up. We licensed it, but we didn't know this. The FDA doesn't go and create advertisements. It doesn't have this on their homepage. This is the homepage of the FDA. This does not look like a regulatory agency. This looks like an advertisement. And amazingly, it was for the bivalent vaccine. It wasn't even a licensed product, meaning it hadn't yet been shown to be safe and effective. Just to make sure we understand each other. When you EUA, when you authorize a product, emergency use authorization, authorize a product, it has not yet been shown to be safe and effective pursuant to the FDA standards. Later, if it's licensed, it's met those FDA standards. So this didn't even meet the FDA standards yet. And yet here it is being promoted. It creates a real serious conflict for the FDA to then say, oops, sorry. And separately, forget what the FDA itself does. It has an advisory committee that advises the FDA, and you probably have seen those. Those are what were all over TV with Paul Offit and some of the other, vaccinologists. They have a whole, interdisciplinary committee of medical professionals that sit there. I'm almost done with this clinical trial section. And this is a congressional report that looked at the FDA's advisory committee, and this is what the congressional report concluded. The overwhelming majority of members, both voting members and consultants, have substantial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. I've deposed a number of these vaccinologists and folks who sit on these committees, and it is incredible, actually. The same people who conduct clinical trials are paid by pharma or consultants for them are also sitting on this committee, despite the fact that you often hear that it's independent. And here's this, not me, that's a congressional report reaching that conclusion. You could read the report, and you could read in detail the incredible amount of conflicts. And then you think they'd clean up their act, but here's, again, this is the HHS Inspector General, again finding 9 years later, the same type of systemic conflicts going on. I'll show you this one video, and then I'll wrap up the clinical trial section. I'm sure you've heard enough from me this morning, want to eat something.